I hope all of you have had a good week and things have been safe for you. I'm certainly happy to have an opportunity to come back and continue our study of the life of Jesus. We're in the, what are these prophets called that we're having our private readings through? There's a name that's often associated. Minor prophets. Because, why? They're short. They're not important. They're just shorter. In Obadiah, we'll start with Obadiah and Jonah, Micah, and Nahum. They're not long books. Obadiah is basically about what? The overthrow of Edom. Overthrow of Edom. And then even in the end, verse 17 of Obadiah, in Mount Zion there shall be those that escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. There's a prediction that even some from Edom would do what eventually? Not necessarily right when the prophet wrote this, but in the future, there would be some from Edom who would turn to the Lord and would be enveloped in the kingdom. All right, Jonah, there is a little bit of information as to who he was from the kings, but Jonah is commissioned to go where? To Nineveh. And instead of going in Nineveh, if you're looking at a map, here is the far eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea at the end of my fingers. And there's at the coastline of Israel. Nineveh would be in a northeastern direction, right? Is that true or false? True. True. Where's Tarshish? Yes, it's completely west. And so God is interested in the Ninevites, and Jonah does not want to go there, so he gets on a ship laden with cargo, and all of a sudden what happens? There's a big what? Big storm. And they think that, they pray to their gods. And finally, Jonah recognizes what's happened. He's disobeyed God, so they do what to him? Throw him over. And he's swallowed by this great fish in chapter 2. And we have a lot on that. Then in chapter 3, the fish has, 2:10 says it vomited out Jonah on dry land. And then in 3, the second time the word of the Lord comes, go to Nineveh, what does he do? Yes, there's a little phrase there. Preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. That's a great, great statement for all of us, isn't it? Especially those who would try to be gospel preachers. We need to preach the preaching that God would bid us, which is His Word. Preach the Word in season, out of season. So he goes into the city and he proclaims that God is going to destroy them, and yet they do what? They repent. And as a result of their repentance, God withholds His destruction. But how does it make Jonah feel in chapter 4? He doesn't like it. I wonder why.
Israelites hated the nation of Assyria and didn't want to anything good for them.
Exactly. He did what God said, but he didn't want anything good to happen. That'd be like for us maybe with the Chinese, or what it was with the Japanese right after the Second World War. Your arch enemy, your national enemy. And so and then God shows him, he's in the sun, and what grows up around him and then shades him for a while. A gourd vine, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And God basically says, look, you didn't do anything to deserve it. All of that was my planning, my work. And so in essence, you need to understand, I'm interested in these people. Jesus uses Nineveh as an example. Luke 4, you remember the men of Nineveh will rise up in judgment against this generation. I said Luke 4, I'm not thinking right, it's Matthew 11. Will rise up in judgment against this, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. It's been stated that in an easy way of remembering Jonah, Jonah goes away from the Lord, chapter 1. Then what? He's back. What's that?
Chapter 2, toward the Lord.
Toward the Lord, yeah. Chapter 3,
With God.
with the Lord. And in chapter 4,
Ahead.
what's that?
Ahead.
Ahead of the Lord. Yes, that's great. Oh, that's been repeated a lot of times. It's very, very, very good. All right, and Obadiah, Jonah, Micah. Micah is about what? Around 735 to 700 BC. The message is God's judgment is going to come because of, it's really a repeat of so much that we've already studied. A repeat of what? Judgment because of their sins, their immorality, their idolatry. We have the time element, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which concerns Samaria, that would be the northern kingdom, and Jerusalem, the southern. And so he gives a number of reasons why their judgment was inescapable in the first couple of chapters. And yet there would be a remnant that would be restored. And chapter 3, here I pray you, ye heads of Jacob, rulers of the house, is it not for you to know justice? One common denominator among so many of the prophets is that the main people the Lord chastises because of Israel's sins are who? The priests, the leaders, simply did not state his will. But yet there would be a time in the latter days when the Lord's kingdom would come. There would be a remnant that would go back. 5 verse 2 is a passage that refers to what? Where Jesus would be born. Bethlehem Ephrathah, which is little among the thousands of Judah. Out of these shall come forth unto me that is to be a ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting, the eternal nature of Jesus Christ. 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7, God has a controversy. When you read that in the scripture, I have a controversy with you. Does that mean that God's mixed up on these people? The controversy is because of what? Not because God just made some mistakes. No, the people's sins, the moral corruption. And then in chapter 7, as we mentioned, it continues that. It's interesting down in verse 6 of chapter 7. The son dishonoreth the father, the daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. Does that sound familiar? Yeah.
Jesus said that.
Exactly. Jesus said that in Matthew 10. All right. And then Nahum, what is the nation, or I shouldn't say the nation, the city that is specified in Nahum that will be destroyed is what? Nineveh. Yeah. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. And its utter ruin is going to... So, the people were so afraid of Assyria, and rightly so, because of their ability to come in. But things would have been fine with them if they had trusted, as Isaiah uses the phrase, trusted in the Holy One of Israel. And they didn't do it. I think it's we'll finish with that, but I turn back, I believe it's Isaiah 31. I was looking at that the other night. I think it's Isaiah 31:1. Yes. Whoever has that first reading. 31:1 of Isaiah.
Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, and to rely on horses, and to trust in chariots because they are many, and in the horsemen because they are very strong. But they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord.
Yeah, they're relying on all of these nations about them, and God is saying, just trust in me. They don't see that. And trust in the Holy One of Israel. All right. David, you look like you wanted to say something. Okay, let's go to the New Testament and get right on into our study of the life of Jesus. When we glance through the life of Jesus, we'll remember the years of preparation. beginning ministry, and it begins with his baptism. Then what's next? Great Galilean, periods of retirement, then closing ministry around Judea and Perea, and then the last week. All right, and we've been spending quite a bit of time on Thursday, in a sense, it's almost as we read these passages that surround what happened on Thursday evening, late on into the night, the wee hours of Friday morning, and then Friday until his death. It's almost like time stands still in the Bible story. We can read narratives where you just leap over hundreds of years. Genesis 5, for instance. Very little is said. And then even in the life of Christ, the first 30 years, you can put in by a page or two, the events on the night he was born. That's Luke 2. The night, the day, 8 days old, 40 days old, 12 years old. And then all of a sudden it skips to he's 30 years old. And yet now all of it is just, you see an emphasis of what is happening here in the trial. It's been stated that there's more information about that aspect of Jesus' life, the trial of Jesus, than any other event. Matthew 26, part of 26 and 7, Mark 14 and 15, Luke 22 and 23, John 18 and 19. 8 chapters, for the most part, are given over to this time. We've talked about the first stage. They took Jesus to Annas after the arrest in the garden. Then they brought him before Caiaphas, who was the de facto high priest, and then he was mistreated. During the time between the second and the third stage, we had Peter's denial, triple denial that we dealt with. And then the third stage, when Jesus was brought back before Caiaphas, and the full convening of the Sanhedrin about dawn to try to give it some form of legality. And then we studied Sunday morning, Judas' remorse and suicide. When he saw, Matthew's account says, when he saw that Jesus was delivered up, then he took the money back to the chief priest and said, I have what? I have sinned in that I betrayed innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to it. And so he cast it out and went out and did what? Hung himself. All right, now we studied that, and we looked at Judas, and now we've come to the first stage of the Roman trial. Jesus is brought to Pilate the first time. Looking ahead quickly, he finds no fault in Jesus, and because of that, and when he hears that the accusations are that he has been stirring up our nation from Galilee all the way down here to Judea. When he hears about Galilee, that triggers his thinking because somebody happened to be in the area. Who was it? Herod. Herod Antipas. And he had control over that. So Pilate thought that would be great. I'll rid myself of any kind of association with this situation and give him to Herod. Herod wanted a miracle, wanted to see a miracle. And Jesus didn't answer him a word, so Herod found nothing wrong with him, sent him back to Pilate the second time. And during that time afterwards, the scourge and the mockery. He's brought back out, and then we have the sentence of Jesus to be crucified. Well, let's look at our passages here that we have marked. We're on the top of page 108, and I probably would do something different. If you'll notice at the very top in bold print where I'm pointing to here, all the passages, Jesus is brought to Pilate the first time, Matthew 27:2, then 11 through 14. That probably should be Mark 15:2 through 5 instead of 1 through 5. And then Luke 23, 1 through 7. Let's start by reading these passages. Matthew 27, let's just go in the order we have it here. Matthew 27, beginning in verse 2, and then after verse 2, it drops off into the account of Jesus, Mary, when she had, I'm sorry, not Mary, Judas as he hanged himself, and then comes back to verse 11. Let's read that, Brother Charlie, if you would, 2, Then 11 through 14.
It says, and they bound him and led him away, to deliver him to Pilate, the governor. Verse 11 says, and Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, if it is as you say, it is as you say. And while they were being accused of the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And he did not answer him with regard to a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed.
All right, let's move to Mark. Let's read our passages first. Mark 15. Mark 15, verse, as I mentioned, verse 1, they bring him, they consult with the whole council and carry him away to Pilate. And 2 through 5, Sandra, if you would.
And Pilate asked him, art thou the king of the Jews? And he answered and said unto them, thou sayest it. And the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. And Pilate asked him again, saying, answerest thou nothing? Behold, how many things they witness against thee. But Jesus yet answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled.
All right, now they've accused Jesus of being, what now? Not the Son of God at this point, but what? King of the Jews. But why had they said he was worthy of death earlier? He blasphemes because he says he's the Son of God. But he also said, you know, from henceforth, this is the end of Luke 22, you'll see the Son of Man and coming in power. So he's saying the Son of Man is the Son of God. He's humanity, and yet he's deity at the same time. Let's move over to Luke 23. If you're still with me, Luke 22. I know you're with me. You're all here. That's a dumb statement. In Luke 22, what I was just having reference to, look at 67. If thou art the Christ, tell us. But he said, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from henceforth shall the Son of Man. Now, first, are you the Christ, the anointed, which includes, kingship. From henceforth shall the Son of Man be seated at the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, art thou then the Son of God? They got the drift. They got the point. And he said, ye say that I am, or it is as you say. And they said, what further need have we of witnesses? Which, of course, they had none to start. For we ourselves have heard from his own mouth. Now, in 23, 1 through 7 is our passage where he comes his first time before Pilate. Kirsten, if you would.
Then the whole company of men arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. And Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, you have said so.
Stop just a second, Kirsten. All right, they bring him before Pilate in 1. And now in verse 2, Luke's account makes it completely obvious how they've changed their charges. They began to accuse him, saying, we found him pervert 3 things, and I make a point of that in the question. Perverting our nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, which was a lie, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. So, all of those are more of the political realm. He's perverting our nation, which was a vague accusation. I mean, what does that mean? But then when it comes to forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and then he's a king, then that would put him more of a political opponent to Caesar, which is what they knew would attract Pilate's attention. Okay, and then 3, Pilate asked him, are you thou the king of the Jews? And there again, thou sayest. Okay, 4 through 7, Kirsten, keep on.
Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. But they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time.
Yeah, notice in verse 5, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and beginning from Galilee, even, and when Pilate heard the word Galilee, he asked where the man, is he from Galilee? Oh boy, that's going to be an out. Herod is here. And so that Luke mentions that, and so he sent him to Herod. All right, let's move on to John's account. John 18, Kay and Paula, somehow I missed you. Let's, John 18, Kay, why don't you read down in verse 28, 28 through 32. 28 through 32 first.
Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they may eat the Passover. Pilate then went unto them and said, What accusations bring ye against this man? They answered and said unto him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee.
Yeah, let's stop right there. I think that's more of a vague, just take our word for it. He's worthy of death. And so we wouldn't have brought him here if he weren't, didn't have problems with it. And so when they say that, keep reading, Kay, 31, 32.
Then said Pilate unto them, Take ye him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put away any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die.
Yeah, which was by the what? Obviously, by the cross. He had signified that back in John 12, 30 and 31. Yea, and I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. This he said, signifying by what manner of death he would die. And so there's a connection there. All right, so the hypocrisy of these folks is seen in the fact that they entered into the palace guard, or the praetorium, the American Standard says, which is actually kind of an anglicized word for the Greek. It was the place where the commander at any outpost would be. And it was also called the Fortress of Antonia. It was in the, if I can get my bearings real quickly, kind of in the northeastern corner of the Temple Mount. And it's interesting that this is where Jesus will be tried before Pilate and then sentenced. It's also where Paul would be taken later on in Acts. You remember on his speech on the castle stairs? That was the Fortress of Antonia. And the Jews are all around there, and he will be spared. And Claudius Lysias, we'll see that in Acts. Same place. And so he's there, and they just basically say, this fellow needs to be put to death. And, well, why? What evil has he done? Well, we wouldn't have brought him if he hadn't been all kinds of evil. Well, if that's the case, you take him and judge him yourself. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. It's not lawful for us to do that. Going back to the idea, they entered not into the praetorium to be filled with Gentiles because they felt like they couldn't do what if they did? Eat the Passover. And there's question about that. Bob and Sandra have a real good statement, I thought, on that. Let's see if I can find it real quickly. Sometimes people say, well, I thought the Passover had already been eaten, or maybe it was at a different time. If you'll notice, let's see, balancing two or three things here. Here it is on page 156. It's this beige part to the middle. I trust you've been numbering your books right where my thumb is. Some have been very confused by the statement that they should not be able to eat the Passover. some reason, therefore, that Jesus did not actually eat the Passover in the night before his betrayal. Yet the scriptures unequivocally state that he did. Passover referred to in John 18:28 could not have referred to the eating of the Passover lamb anyway, because of uncleanness from entering a place of the Gentiles only lasted until sunset, and the Passover lamb was eaten in the evening. So defilement early in the day on Friday would not have prevented the Jews from eating the Passover lamb Friday night. The truth is, the whole week of unleavened bread was called Passover, and that the term Passover was applied not only to the Passover lamb, but to all sacrifices offered during the whole week. So it's basically saying, during this holy week of Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we can't do those kinds of things if we become ceremonially unclean. That seems to be the idea there. Let's go ahead and finish out the reading. Paula, if you would, read for us 33 through 38. 33 through 38.
Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell thee of me? And Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servant fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews and said unto them, I find no fault at all.
Taking the last part first, when Pilate asked him in 37, Art thou a king then? Thou sayest that I am a king. There's a marginal reading that some of you have. Thou sayest it because I am a king. And he said a little bit earlier, who told you of this? Which would have arrested Pilate's attention. Now just think, just put in your back of your mind, here are Jews that are chafing under Roman occupation. This is their land. The Romans are over them. They could not stand it. Would the Jews ever despise a person who was trying to relieve them or get them out from under the political thumb of the Romans? No.
That's what they wanted.
That's what they were wanting all along. And Jesus was not pacifying them, placating them. He was not giving them what they were wanting. So, let's back up now. In 33, Pilate has been listening to these accusations, and they're very vague, except for he says he's a king. So he has this private interview with Jesus, private hearing. He goes back into the praetorium. Evidently, if I understand the scene correctly, Jesus is outside of the part where he would try people in the fortress of Antony, and all the Jews, the chief priests, are all lined up out there, and they're hollering all these things, and he hears them. So then he enters in, he brings Jesus in there, and he says, Are you then the king of the Jews? Because he finds it difficult to understand why Jews would be bringing somebody whom they claim is wanting to be a king for them to the Romans. Why the sheer honesty about all this? And so Jesus then, I think, gives Pilate a lot to chew on. He says, sayest thou this of thyself, or did others tell it thee concerning me? Did you come to the conclusion all on your own that I'm a king, or did somebody else say that? Did you find all the evidence that I'm a king? Pilate said, Am I a Jew? I don't know about all machinations that go on with the Jews. Your own nation and chief priests delivered you to me. So what have you done? And then Jesus gives some of the nature of the kingdom. Are you then a king? Well, my kingdom is not of this world. It's an out-of-world kingdom, a spiritual kingdom, we would say. If it were, then would my servants fight that I would not be delivered up to you. So, in other words, if I'm the kind of king that they're claiming I am, then I would have my servants fighting, and I wouldn't be delivered up. So you can see the opposing. It doesn't make sense. If I were in Pilate's shoes, this does not make any sense. They're claiming he's a king. They despise us. They want us out of here. And yet they're saying he's a king. And then he says, yes, I am a king, but it's not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, and I wouldn't be standing right here before you. So Pilate has this information. So then it's got, there's more to this story than meets the eye. So he says in verse 37, are you then the king? Thou sayest that I am. To this end have I been born, and to this end am I come into the world. Now, if you're not careful, we can gloss over something. There are two things here about Jesus that you might want to underline. He says, thou sayest that I am. To this end have I been born. That is, I came into the world as a baby. And to this end, am I come into the world. He's been born, and then to this end have I come into the world. That indicates that he existed, what? Before he came into the world, or before he was born. For to this end have I been born, and to this end have I come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth, or unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth hears my voice. Now, that's an interesting idea also. Jesus had earlier said, as all of us can quote in chapter 14, to the apostles, that I am the way, the truth. I'm the way, the truth, and the what? The life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. So here Jesus is the embodiment of what is what is facts, what is substantive, what is. Thank you, Brother Gene. I had to look twice to see what I thought you were holding up your finger. Thank you. So the idea on coming into the world, he was born, and then he came into the world. For this end was I born, and to this end have I come. I existed before I was born. Which, remember John 1? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. In the beginning it already was. He was already in existence. So you've got something stated there. Another thing I find interesting, in John's account, I know this, we're kind of pausing in midstream here. When he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and says, I find no crime in him. Based on this, he's not the kind of military or political threat that would cause us any harm. And then he brings out the idea of releasing one that was common. Well, if you'll notice on down in chapter 19, which would be his second appearance before Pilate, the Jews make something else known that really troubles Pilate. He comes out in verse 2. Soldiers platted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, arrayed him in purple garment. They said, Hail, King of the Jews, and they struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said, Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no crime in him. That's after he'd been beaten up, an innocent man beaten up unnecessarily. Verse 5, Jesus therefore came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garment. And Pilate said, Behold the man. When therefore the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said, Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no crime in him. We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself. Now they change it back to what? The Son of God. Well, look at what happens. When Pilate therefore heard this saying, he was the more afraid. Pilate's beginning to get it, that there is more to this man than meets the eye. So he entered into the praetorium where Jesus was. Where did you come from? From whence art thou? And Jesus gave him no answer. And then he said, I have power to release you. And then Jesus goes on there. But that's the second appearance before this. Well, I mean, it's all the second appearance, but it would be right before Pilate sentences him. So here they said, he says he's a king. That's their charge. We're perverting our nation. He's saying we don't have to pay taxes. And now, just go ahead and crucify him. Why? What? He says he's the Son of God. And that's where the truth comes back out.
Pilate didn't care about that, did he? Didn't make no difference to him who he said he was.
Yeah.
Oh, he was worried about the king. You brought it to me saying he's a king, going to be against Caesar.
Yeah.
And then he tells me out of his mouth, if my people fight, ain't nobody fighting for me.
Right. But I think all of us can see that it just did not, it would not have made sense to Pilate. The accusations, if he's a king, why are they bringing him to me? Why aren't they using him and following him and, mustering some kind of little army against us? And then when he himself says, well, did you hear this of yourself or from others? If Jesus had been the kind of king that they wanted to charge him as being, then who probably would have brought charges against Jesus to Pilate? Not, as a nation or a group of people. Not the Jews, but the Gentiles, the Romans. The Romans would have. And if the Jews are trying to think, I haven't thought this through how I could illustrate it, but if Hezbollah is put it somehow, if you had some people and Hezbollah and Hamas over there, they're trying their best to get at the Israelis, and somehow they get in there, and you have somebody who said, here's our leader, here's the one that says he's king of Hamas, and we're turning him over to you, and he said, I've not been doing anything like that. That's probably a poor illustration, but it has to be confusing. Now, one other quick thing. When Jesus said, I was born and I came to the world that I should bear witness to the truth, everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And then Pilate says, what is truth? Did he stay around to hear Jesus answer? No. When he had said this, he went out and then he confers with the Jews again. That's quintessential. Somebody says something about a Bible matter. What's that? And then they're through with you. They're not interested in hearing the actual answer. He had gotten enough information where he felt like Jesus was what? Guilty or innocent? Innocent, yeah. And that's all he needed to know. And so he's going to go back out there, but it won't stop there. You look like you want to say something.
You were mentioning a group that would bring charges against Jesus, and you mentioned Romans. Well, there weren't very many Romans in Israel. The Roman troops, most of them weren't even Roman citizens.
Yeah.
They were hirelings. And so the Jews are a race and a people, and we're familiar with that from
Right.
creation almost. But the Romans could buy citizenship, and there were very few born
Yes.
Roman citizenship. Paul was an unusual Jew that was a Roman citizen. So there weren't like a bunch of Romans are hanging around in Jerusalem.
Right.
It wasn't a good place as far as they were concerned. That was a hick town somewhere out in the backwaters. And so we didn't have a Roman contingent of Roman citizens there to bring charges.
No, and even the ones that Jesus had some dealings with, the dealings were always favorable. I'm thinking about the centurion servant, Luke 7. Others where they were favorable toward him. You look like you were going to say something, Jenny. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
The word you used a while ago, they used Pilate.
Yes.
They didn't go for him for authority. They wanted him to do what they wanted done. They used his position to try to carry out what they wanted done.
This is, yes, you're exactly right. This is one of the greatest displays of God's providence. In Psalm 2, the psalmist, David, starts off, why do the Gentiles rage and the peoples imagine vain things? The kings of the earth set themselves together, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us cast away the bands from us, and so on. He gives identifies four classes of people there. Why do the Gentiles rage, the peoples imagine vain things, the kings of the earth, and the rulers? Well, one of the Gentiles, that'd be the Romans that he's before with Pilate. The kings, he'll be before Herod in just a moment. The rulers, that would be Pilate. And then the people would be the Jews. All are mixed together in this mockery of a trial. And then the psalmist goes on to say, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he declare, this is my son, this day have I begotten thee. And he talks about Jesus' resurrection from the dead. In Acts, the 4th chapter, it's interesting. Turn over to Acts 4. Acts 4, I know our time is about out, but I do want to make this point as we're reading this all together, and then come back to Pilate real quickly. In Acts 4, Peter and John have been arrested. They've been brought before the Sanhedrin. Peter speaks, and the Sanhedrin convenes as to what to do to these fellows. And so they just charge them not to speak. So there in verse 23, 4:23, being let go, they came to their own company, that'd be the apostles, reported all the chief priests and elders had said. And they, when they heard it, lifted up their voice to God with one accord, and said, O Lord, thou that didst make the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that in them is, who by the Holy Spirit, by the mouth of our father David, thy servant, did say, and here's Psalm 2, why did the Gentiles rage and the people imagine vain things? The kings of the earth set themselves in array. The rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. Look at the explanation. For of a truth in this city, against thy holy Son Jesus, whom thou didst anoint, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, were gathered together to do whatsoever thy hand and counsel foreordained to come to pass. A reason I wanted to emphasize that, we can look at Pilate and see a miserable, contradicted figure, basically a politician, who's seeking power above all else. And he knows here's a righteous man. He's already let him be beaten. And he's trying to get them to rule. Well, maybe I can, vie him against Barabbas, and they'll see the two, and they'll want Jesus instead of Barabbas, and that doesn't work out. And so he sees what needs to be done. But then he hears, oh, you're not Caesar's friend. And so he has an innocent man crucified. And we look at Pilate as this spineless individual, which he was. And yet, it all plays. Could Pilate have done something differently? Yes. But all of this played into the whole scheme of God and his providence, where God could use evil people, spineless people, to accomplish a bigger purpose, which is what he did with the crucifixion of Jesus. And to me, that's another one of those spine-tingling events in the Scripture, where you see the providence of God, how God uses people, places, events, things, all acting in a very normal way, but it accomplishes his overall bigger picture. You say something.
I was wondering, was Pilate the one instrumental in appointing the fake high priest, or would that have been under the purview of Herod and Antipas to choose the Jewish person who was going to work with the Roman government, and I'm thinking it might have been Pilate, since he was right.
He's governor, yeah.
Right there in.
Right there in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, and so he would have known Caiaphas and Annas and had dealings with them and realized that, you know, they were up to no good.
Right. And in fact, he says that he knew for envy they delivered him to him. Yeah. Well, we don't have time to do this justice. It's 5 till. Let's stop and we'll try to answer our questions, and any discussion you want to make from that, we can do Sunday, Lord willing. Any last comments, anybody? Kay, you look like you might have had a thought.
I did. I was going to ask, you were saying about the Romans. So the the Romans didn't live in Jerusalem with the Jews, right?
Well, some did. Like Gene said, there was not an overabundance of them, but they had a Roman garrison there.
So were they like a nation that was over the Jews, kind of say they had to, I guess, pay tribute to the Romans?
Yeah, and that's what Jesus, they lied about Jesus. They had to pay if they used a denarii, they had to use that money to pay their taxes. And that's the point that's made there in Matthew 22. So that was a lie about Jesus. Perverting the nation was a vague charge, probably the idea that he came to fulfill the law in that. And then the other thing that they accused him of being a king, they twisted that. Okay, thank you for